'Tis I, Dr. Dementia! And for the love of it all, did we have to get a new expansion? I finally got it up to date, and now we get Plunder coming out? Are you kidding me? Well, we'll discuss that when we get to it. Right now, we're gonna start with the 6th expansion, Hinterlands, released in October 2011, with the update pack just made available within the past month or so. The theme of this expansion offering a balance of engine building, big money, and alternate victory point cards, emphasizing shifting and silver gaining, and having no cards that enable you to thin your deck by more than one card at a time. There's a diversity of kingdom cards in here, pushing Dominion away from being heavily streamlined small deck action engines and toward navigating bulky decks. On to the cards! So version 1.0 cards first before update pack, version 2.0 cards in next video, blah blah blah. You get the idea by now. Thankfully, this is the last expansion that we have an update pack for, so hopefully I won't have to go into this charade every single time. But let's get to it. First card we're going to look at, Border Village. Costs 6 to purchase, plus 1 card, plus 2 actions. When you gain this, gain a cheaper card. So without looking at that secondary effect, it's a basic village. But now with that secondary effect, you open yourself up to a lot of potential options. You are basically paying 6 for a strong action card costing 5 in order to get this for free, essentially. So there's not much more I can say about this. This is basically a simple village with this nice little bonus here. There's nothing wrong with that. So let's look at what we could potentially get here. Council room, torturer, even laboratory, even market. Very good options here. The throne room, you know, these are great. If you reduce the cost of some of the others by using bridge and throne room, even princess, even king's court, you could basically get anything that was available to you as long as it costs less than what this did. I mean, if it all costs 0, hell, you've got everything available to you. So cost reduction does help a lot. Now, because it is a basic village, it's not going to have a lot of versatility in your deck, but what it's going to offer is, because of that cost, transfer benefit. So replace, remodel, remake, that's all great. Also, using bridge and princess, you could potentially ironworks into this and workshop into this and still get a cheaper card as long as you gain it. You don't have to buy it, you can just gain it. This is a good card. Because of that cost, however, you're looking at mid-game at the earliest to pick this up, but if you were able to gain this in other ways, such as Lurker, yeah, you can get this in the early game too. Also, other trash benefited cards such as Apprentice or even Salvager, they're even fantastic. This is gonna be a good target for it. There's a lot you can do with this. And in the end game, still has a benefit for it. Because if you want to gain some extra victory points, but you're not going to have enough for that province or colony, then you can purchase this to gain a duchy. So you're not entirely losing out on it. It's a fun card. And that's it. I got nothing more on it. It's a fun card. Next up, we have a new treasure, simply called Cash. Classify the purchase, generating 3 coin. When you gain this, gain 2 coppers. Now, I'm reminded of Contraband for Prosperity 1.0. Yes. Pay 5, you gain 3, yay, whoop-de-doo-dah. The problem here is you gain 2 coppers, and in the early game, kind of hard to do if you're not able to trash them. I mean, yeah, you could do something well with Watchtower, but other than that, it's kind of a weak treasure. I mean, yes, the 3 will be able to help you out if you can't reach the 6, but you are going to have to draw into these coppers, and basically, if you don't have any way to trash the coppers for a benefit, Moneylender, Mine, Expand, any of those, then you're going to be out of luck. At the very least with Contraband, you got to buy out of it. In this case, it's the coppers, and that overall weakness makes this card pretty skippable. Could be good if you had Gardens, just filling up the deck. If you were to pick it up, it's definitely an early game card, because once you start affording proper golds, you don't need this. At that point, you could potentially mine this into something better. You could expand it into a province, simple as that. And honestly, that would be the best option for it. Your transfer benefit cards are going to come into play very quickly if they're available to you for cash. But other than that, not so much. Next card we're going to take a look at is the Cartographer. Costing 5 the purchase, plus 1 card, plus 1 action. Look at the top 4 cards of your deck, discard any number of them, and then put the rest back in any order. Now, a 4-card scribe with sifting and cycling is not bad. because it gives you some options without necessarily sacrificing an action, plus you get a small cantrip on it. It's not super strong, but it does have its uses, and you're really going to see more benefit out of Cartographer. It does not really more powerful 5-cost cards out on the field, but here's a couple of examples which works out. If you're having issues with deck control, or your engine is unreliable, there's probably not much junk, there's not much thinning, and there's a lot of junk attacks and curse generators. It can allow you to find the best cards while quote-unquote pseudo-thinning. You're discarding, kind of like Seller, but you're not trashing them. So if there's minimal trashing, then this is going to be good. It's getting to your next shuffle, you can cycle through a large number of cards this way and basically thin out your deck quickly enough. So, in a case like this, throne rooming or even King's Courting into Cartographer is going to be good. And then finally, any cards that basically have an effect when they're discarded. And there are some that'll come up. There is one in this set that benefits from that. I'll explain that when we get to it. But overall, it's not super bad. The big problem is you're paying for a cantrip with that sifting at 5 cost. University is a good way to get into this. Bridging or princessing into Ironworks is another good one. It isn't going to be super great in the beginning because all you're going to have is basically coppers and estates, so it wouldn't be my first card on a 5-2 split. In the mid-game, probably a little bit better. This is very dependent on what's available to you on the supply piles. It's not a bad card, it's just not super strong for what it does. Next up, we have Crossroads. Costing 2 to purchase, reveal your hand. Plus 1 card per victory card revealed. If this is the first time you play a Crossroads this turn, plus 3 actions. This is good for getting potential deck combinations out and rolling very, very quickly. But that stipulation is that you basically can only play a Crossroads per turn. So you definitely don't want to over-deck into this and have more than a couple in your deck at a time because of the fact that you're only going to get the plus 3 actions, right then and there. And this requires victory cards, which it becomes a problem because they're dead cards and they're not going to help you by building into actions or treasures, which means you might have gotten rid of your estates. It's not going to be super beneficial, but the dual victory cards are probably a good synergy for this because of the fact that you need them. So having the mills, having the great halls, having the harems, and yes, having the nobles, having any of those are going to be viable. And they're going to work so well with this that you're going to be fine. So this will set you up for the next few turns. And the cheap cost is not a big deal. You need draw power. That's basically what you need for this. So you need those powerful draw cards. You need those villages. You need those laboratories. Yes, in this particular case, I would even consider Warehouse for the fact that you could discard a second Crossroads if it was in your hand. If you can build a deck with the dual victory cards especially, and get rid of the trashy ones, then Crossroads is going to work for you all the way up into the late game until you actually start purchasing the more expensive ones, such as provinces and colonies. You could start this off on, early game, because you still have the estates in there until you trash them. And then build up in the mid game and into the end game. By the end game, you have what you need. You're probably not going to use Crossroads that much. It becomes basically a fodder or a trash for benefit. A very cheap trash for benefit, mind you, because it is 2 costs. But at least with a 2 cost, you can afford it at pretty much every stage of the game unless you have a lot of dead cards in your hand. The actions will come in handy. Let's also consider one other final thing. Diadem. That's 3 actions right off the bat. You keep building up those actions, Diadem's going to be so useful. So, another good synergy for this card. Definitely down about. Next on the list is a new Trash for Benefit card, Develop. Costing 3 to purchase, trash a card from your hand, gain 2 cards onto your deck, with 1 costing exactly 1 more than it, and 1 costing exactly 1 less than it in either order. Now, this is a very unique Trash for Benefit card, where it's not like any of the others, which are very specific and distinct on what you can purchase. This one opens up some options. Let's look at it. First off, if you bought this at the early game, which you can do on a 3-4 split, no questions asked, this can primarily function as your estate trash. Why? Well, you can trash those for basically 1 more than getting something for 3 silvers, astrolabes, any of those goodies. Or if for some reason you've done a lot of cost reductions, such as with Bridge or Princess, you can get something at 1 if it's cheap enough, or can't get anything at 1. So at that point, you're great. You can easily get rid of your coppers and your estates pretty successfully, with the estates giving you much more of a benefit. What's going to shine is when your cards start costing 3, 4, or 5, because then you basically have your run-of-the-mill of a lot of cards. If they're 5, you can gain something costing 6, like the Border Village, like Golds, you know, like Grand Markets. You can start getting some good cards. So this focuses on variety. So you basically need the right cards at the right price points. There's not much more in terms of synergy you can do with this. A lot of your villages are going to be useful because if it's 3 cost point, then you can pick this up at any point in the game and really make it work. It's a decent transfer benefit card. It requires you to think. You really want to think about your moves carefully. Early on, it's not important because again, the estates are going to be your primary target. After that, however, as you get into the mid game and even into the late game, you're going to see that it's going to require some critical thinking. Still good as it is, any point in the game, and you're really great with it. Next card on the list is Duchess, costing 2 to purchase, plus 2 coin. Each player, including you, looks at the top card of their deck and may discard it. In addition, in games using this, when you gain a duchy, you may gain a Duchess. Now, right off the bat, a very simple, deck inspection. You basically top deck in the top card, and deciding whether to keep it or discard it. But everybody takes advantage of it. Let's look at the secondary effect first, before anything else. When you gain a Duchess, you gain this for free. Now, it's not bad, and it can potentially help getting through some of your cards a lot faster, especially ones that are going to be dead cards in your hand. Because this synergizes with Duchies automatically because of this effect, Duke is a good option using this card. It can be worth it in the early game on a 5-2 opener, but it is weak. It basically just allows a top deck scry with a terminal silver. Yeah, you're paying 1 less for the terminal silver, but there's no actions involved in it. You're basically doing that, and that's it. I mean, yes, you could get extras from the duchies, but by the time you're purchasing duchies, you're probably at the point where 1, you want to prioritize dukes, or 2, you're near the mid to late game where you should be focusing on the more expensive cards, and if you're getting duchies just for this effect, it's not a super great effect. A lot of other decks can do a top deck inspection, but still useful for the early game. But after that, you're not going to need that many. And again, in the rare circumstance, this only works well when you are coupling dukes with duchies. That's about it. You're going to find better cards that are going to give you that silver a little bit better than what Duchess offers. Still, it isn't too bad. Next, it's time to visit the embassy. Costing 5 to purchase, plus 5 cards, discard 3 cards, however. When you gain this, each other player gains a silver. Now, this is a slight upgrade over Warehouse. That 5 cost opportunity, however, puts a little bit of a detrimental hit on it. Not super badly, but it could still be useful on occasion. We'll look at its top part first. Plus 5 cards to discard 3. You're going at plus 1 at card advantage, which is compared to a lot of other cards that it's just straight up advantage. It's basically as much as a moat in terms of card advantage, but it is useful sifting through crap and going for treasure. So this works in great money deck strategies, and this can synergize quite well into Magnate, provided you have village support, which means you have plenty of actions to play into this, and you need that. You need those actions in order to really be powerful with this, and you can work into great money decks to at least get you a province into a colony as well, especially if you got bank as an option here. That secondary effect where each player gains a silver, that's mandatory. So that could be, in some cases, a bit of a junking attack, because not many people want a silver if they got more expensive cards like Bank, Philosopher's Stone, Gold, or even Platinums for that matter, or Alastrolabe. It can act like a weak junking attack, but it's not impactful enough. And if you got this card at the very beginning, this puts your opponent in a mildly big advantage at the fact that they will already have a silver that they won't need to purchase, and can purchase something else that could potentially cost 3 or 4. There's not many options for this. Again, big money is a potential powerful one. That discard hits hard, and Smithy is a more viable option where you get card advantage as strong as a moat. You basically are relying on extra actions in order to take advantage of the embassy. I would say early game, if it wasn't for the fact that your opponent's going to get a silver on the early game. Mid game, yes, because then the silver might force them to consider cycling through. Late game, not really. I wouldn't see this late game unless you were reliably heavily on your treasures in order to do this. It's okay, for the most part. It's not overly strong, it's okay. Next on the list is a new victory card, simply called Farmland, costing 6 to purchase, generating 2 victory points. In addition, when you gain this, trash a card from your hand and gain a non-Farmland card, costing exactly 2 more than it. Now, this is a unique card. 8 in a game with 2 players, 12 in games with 3 or more. This is a victory card with a trash for benefit on gain effect, which is interesting. It's unique, but that price point makes it hard to chew on. It's rarely used to score, and it is somewhat restricted, but I mean 2 more than it is not bad, and you can trash any card in your hand other than Farmland. There is some uses though. In the late game, if your valuable cards are no longer needed, then you could basically trash your golds and your platinums and turn those into provinces and colonies. Any 6-cost card can become awesome, can basically become a province for you. Add on to the victory points to help you try to take a necessary lead. Getting rid of the junk cards, if you needed a worker village, which costs 4, you have 6 to spend and an estate in hand, you could buy the farmland, trash the estate, and turn that into a worker's village. You would go +1 in victory point advantage, but at least you would have a much more powerful card. And you could basically consider Farmland to be a silver. You could use the silver and then something that costs 6 like Grand Market to gain it. It's unique and restricted in what it can do. 6 costs is hard to chew on, and it's a limited game. But if there's no other way to obtain a alternative method of victory points other than your basic victory cards, then yes, Farmland is going to be super useful. And it's going to matter having an extra 2. This is another, if the supply piles matter, go for it. If not, you might not even see it. But, mid-game, at the earliest into late game, there's no reason you should get this in the early game because you're going to want golds first before you get into a farmland. So, it's not bad. It can still be useful in some circumstances. Not a bad victory card. There are some better ones out there. Next card we're going to look at is a treasure reaction card. First one of its type, Fool's Gold. Costing 2 to purchase, generating question mark. The reason being, if this is the first time you played Fool's Gold this turn, +1 coin. Otherwise, +4 coin. That's the treasure part. For the reaction, when another player gains a province, you may trash this from your hand to gain a gold onto your deck. Now, I want to look at the treasure part first on this. This is very, very, very powerful. Just as an example, if you have 3 of these in your hand and you play them back to back to back, you generate 9 coin. Now, that might not seem great. You could probably do that with 3 golds. However, that effect can get powerful the more you use it. It's cheap and a dense payload card. It only costs 2. So a remake or remodel and even a mine will get these into your hand a lot faster. And you're only offering up a copper. You don't have to try hard to pay 6 for a gold every single time. And, above all else, the card is basically designed to get you to want to buy more of these. So if you got an early 5, get that mint. Even with 2, you can still afford this. And then that means you can use mint on those in order to continuously get more, and you're going to generate more out of it. You're getting 3 golds, they're generating 3 per card. But 4 Fool's Golds are going to generate 3 1/4 per card. You're going to end up being with a positive as a result of it. It's best after you working on some deck control though. And that's the thing. So if you can get these into your deck sooner rather than later, you're going to have a great advantage into it. But it is going to have its typical problems with treasure-based payload cards. You could probably get a very crappy shuffle and you would end up nothing, and that's a bad thing. But there's ways around that. First off, Astrolabe. There's your extra buys. That's going to help you. Next up, Tiara. You can play this twice. And boom, that's fantastic. The reaction part, it's rarely worth using. And if you start by sacrificing 1 at a time for the provinces, you're going to lose its main effect horrendously. And honestly, it's not great. You want to be able to crash into these as much as possible. So, Harbinger getting them into your hand is a good thing. You basically need to sift through, and funny enough, Cartographer is going to do that for you to a degree. You want to be able to continuously push out into all of the treasures you can. And if your deck was full of Fool's Golds, you're probably going to be set for that. There's very rare circumstances where I would really use this reaction effect. I think the only time I would use this reaction effect is if I only have one or two at most. Most of my deck is already built, and I'm not going to crash into these hard enough. It can be still very effective with its cheap costs. Because of that alone, you can pick this up at any turn. And because you want as many Fool's Golds as possible, ding, hello, Magnate! If you're coupling this with Astrolabes, then you have viability. You just need the buys, which Astrolabe will give you. You're going to get the draw power from Magnate. All you need is the actions. Get those actions, and you're going to be golden. So, get this in the early game or in the mid game, because you want your deck as stacked as much as possible. Remake, remodel into your coppers, mine into your coppers, and get them into your hand. Buy more of them. Oh, somebody's here for my class. Well, have a seat then. Thank you very much. And, just start building up this deck. I wouldn't go for the end game, though, on this, because by that point, you already have your synergy. Early game. Mid game, best thing. The reaction effect can still have its uses depending on how many Fool's Golds you have, but again, it's a solid card. It's a solid treasure card, and it works with a lot of decks. Go for it. Next card we're going to look at is the Haggler. Costing 5 to purchase, plus 2 coin. This turn, when you gain a card, if you bought it, gain a cheaper non-victory card. Now, this is awesome for the fact that this is going to help you fill up your deck with cards that you're going to need. Plus 1 card, plus 1 action cantrips, your sifters, your scries, basically a whole bunch of cards a lot sooner than possible. And a terminal silver to help play that is going to be useful. Now, it might be tough in the early game when you're still building up the necessary coppers, and you would still need to hit this on a 5-2 split in order to pick this up. But at least it's going to be beneficial giving you that extra effect with plus 2 coin. At the very least, you could walk away with an action card costing 4 and gaining a silver out of it. It's going to see a lot more action in the mid game when you're getting your more expensive cards. And trust me, if you're able to pick up a King's Court with this, then you basically have the 6 range all set for you. So the Grand Markets, and this is where Peddlers getting reduced in cost is going to be helpful. And also, in addition to that, using both Bridge as well as Princess, reducing the cost of a lot of the cards is going to make a difference. Now, it actually specifically states buying it. So the Ironworks Workshop strategies are going to fall out of place. But here is where Fool's Gold is going to really shine here, because if you were able to afford a Platinum, you could afford any of the cards on that set minus the victory cards. With this card, plus buys are going to be super useful. So every card you can think of that's going to give you a plus buy, such as Wharf, Astrolabe, Woodcutter, the Markets, Festival, they're going to shine with this card. You need to be able to continuously draw into this. So, getting this onto your deck is going to be vitally important. Deck to discard, or even Harbinger to build onto the deck is going to shine for this. It will lose its potency as the game goes on. I would say, early to mid, if you can get this on the 5-2 split, might as well take advantage of it. At least build your deck up a little bit. But the mid game's going to shine where you're going to get the majority of your action cards here. It's a great card. I like it. Get more of it. Next up on the roster, we have Highway. Costing 5 to purchase, plus 1 card, plus 1 action. This turn, cards cost 1 less. So we take Bridge, and we get rid of the buy, and we give it a cantrip. So, is that good? Abso-fucking-lutely. I can't tell you how awesome this is. This is a slight improvement, because basically now, you have the ability to continuously draw into these. This is a cantrip that you want in your deck no matter what. And the game basically will the winner of this game is basically going to be determined by who can get the most highways, especially if Throne Room as well as King's Court are in play right now. So, I don't need to tell you the synergies on this one because it's the same way with Bridge. You basically want to play into this. The one downside is you are paying 1 extra coin in order to get this, but what this gives you is basically being able to play this without taking up terminal space, which means you can continuously draw into your deck. Powerful draw power means that most of your coin are going to be in your action cards, and I would say that's the best way to do it. You still need buys, however. So you're going to need your plus buys from your markets and your feasts. You can get woodcutter, and yes, bridge will work well with this. Princess will also work well with this. But if you have powerful draw power, then you can afford to put some coin in the deck. Fool's Gold and Astrolabe work well on this particular case. Tiara, yes, Tiara is also going to work great, coupling with those treasures to double up on them. So this will get to your treasures much faster, and these will help get to your victory cards much faster. Winning the highway pile split is going to be very important, because if you can get to those first, you're probably going to get to your high-level victory cards a lot faster. You could put a deck with these treasuries and peddlers, and you're basically set. Add a couple of grand markets, and I'm not complaining. This is a card that if you can get it in the early game, you want to get it as soon as possible, which means, hint, City works well, because this is probably going to be one of the first piles that's going to be diminished. So early game, mid game, late game, you want to use this card as often as possible. It's not going to strain your deck, less terminal space. You basically want to make sure you can draw into this. This is an outstanding card. Got another new treasure we're going to take a look at, and that's Ill-Gotten Gains. Costing 5 to purchase, generating 1 coin. When you play this, you may gain a copper to your hand. When you gain this, each other player gains a curse. Now, I have 3 problems with this card. Well, 4 technically. First off, it costs 5. That's a high opportunity cost for everything else that occurs here. Second of all, it only generates 1 coin. When you play this, you may gain a copper to your hand. You might not want coppers. It comes down specifically for being one thing. A treasure that is also a curse generator. Everybody else is going to get a curse. In a 2-player game, that's not as bad, but you have to gain the card. This is a treasure where you want to gain it for yourself, but you don't want to use it because you end up with junk cards themselves. And also, since it's a curse generator without being an attack, Moat and Lighthouse don't work against it. Keep that part in mind. You buy the Ill-Gotten Gains. All of them. Gain the curses for your opponent, and then that's it. You basically then have a 5-cost treasure that you don't want to play for the sake of gaining more coppers. Lurker, as well as Ironworks and Workshop, or even University, reducing the cost with Princess, Highway, and Bridge. It's a gain for a curse without you playing the treasure. You're basically creating terminal space for yourself. Unnecessary terminal space. If you really want to get this card, basically in the early to mid game, just to stack up the junk curses for your opponent. But you also want to make sure you have for trash for benefit, because you don't want to, say, use Chapel on this just to get rid of it and not get a benefit for it after that. You don't want to play it for its effect. You want to play it for when you gain it. It's not worth it at 5. It's not worth it at all. That is the one best option I can say for this. Early to mid. You shouldn't even touch this in the late game, because at that point, a curse or 2 is not going to matter if you can't draw it enough. This is... I said some things I didn't like about the treasures in Prosperity. This one, however, takes the cake. This is not a good card. Next up, we're going to look at Inn. Costing 5 to purchase, plus 2 cards, plus 2 actions, but you discard 2 cards. When you gain this, reveal any number of action cards from your discard pile and shuffle them into your deck. Now, top section first, plus 2 cards, plus 2 action. You know, it's a little bit of an, interesting village. I mean, can't scoff at that, but you got to discard 2 cards. So you're -1 in card advantage, which means you're looking at the same card advantage you would have as if you were playing Warehouse. But those plus 2 actions will help. If you start your hand with some dead cards, gives you at least some fodder to draw into some better ones. This is going to be the start of your engine building, and it's both that top effect and the bottom effect that's going to play into the part. Let's now look into the bottom effect. This gives you some powerful sifting. And you can reduce the cost, because that is a high opportunity cost for this card. You can reduce the cost to workshop it and to ironworks it. Simple enough. You could also lurk at the card if you wanted to, just to get it into your hand a lot faster. It's not when you just buy it, it's when you gain it at any point in the game. So, any effect that allows you to gain, take advantage of it with this card, because then it's going to give you the ability to just go through every one of your action cards in your discard pile and put them right into your deck. Very viable when you have just purchased some very, very high quality action cards. Because of that effect, you don't want that many ins in your deck. Basically, you just need a couple of them just to get the ball rolling. But this will help you avoid pulling into duds, into terminal drawers, or even some dead cards. Plus, if you are playing with a good synergy such as Outpost, purchasing it in on Outpost is going to be very viable for you, because you'll be able to use any of the action cards you used on the previous turn in order to set yourself up to reuse them again. This also makes Tactician a very, very tasty card to use with this. Now, again, high opportunity cost makes this very difficult to use, and you also want to keep note of the amount of drawer and terminal space in your shuffle that you're creating with this on-gain effect. Early game, it's too early. You shouldn't have something that's going to detrimentally affect you early on when you don't have any action cards to play with, so definitely not in the early game, and definitely not on your opening hand, especially on a 5-2 split. Mid-game is where you want to start considering this. Late mid to late game. You're not using it for its draw and discard. Well, it is helpful. It's that gain effect and the fact that you're getting necessary actions. You basically want to make sure that you have enough actions you're going to continue playing. Basically, overdraw. And that's what you're looking at with this card. It's still a viable option, because if you can get it in any way other than buying it, then you've saved yourself some money. Can be potent when played correctly. Next card we're going to look at is literally Red Mage in card form, for basically anything you can do as an action card. Jack of all trades. Costing 4 to purchase. You gain a silver. Look at the top card of your deck. You may discard it, draw until you have 5 cards in your hand, and then you may trash a non-treasure card from your hand. Doing these from top to bottom in that order. Now, this is kind of interesting. We basically have a gainer, a trasher, a deck inspector, and a draw 2 card. Basically, a mini version of a library, mini version of bandit, mini version of spy, and basically a mini version of a chapel. So you can do all of these. You do all of these mandatory, except for the trashing part. You can trash any non-treasure card from your hand. That is an optional one. So, synergies is just based on what you can do for these effects. There's so many of them, I'd rather just go into the card in general. Let's look at it this way. You got this in the early game, especially in your opening hand on a 4-3 or a 5-2 split. Basically, use this to gain a silver, and then trash one of your estates. Simple enough, thins out your deck. It is basically the best way to just trash out some estates, and then eventually some coppers that you're not going to need, because you're going to get a silver every single time. So if you change out all of the coppers to silvers, you have some much more needed power. But that gaining part can be useful. Like Courtier, like Bandit, the main primary use of gaining treasure like that in a very accelerated capacity is to just trash for benefit using remake, remodel, replace, expand, and forge to just transform that all into some much more powerful treasure, much more powerful action cards, and of course, greening your deck with the powerful victory cards. Jack of all trades also functions as a defense against attacks, basically countering hand-size attacks like goons and militia, as well as any top decking like spy. Basically giving you the ability to deal with any curses, if you have them, or any other trash or terminal cards that you're not going to need. There's a lot of variety of this. Now, because this does basically everything in smaller variants, you might not need it for specific reasons. For example, if Bandit is available, you don't need it to gain a silver, so you might forego that. There might be there might be Chapel already available to you, so you might want to skip this because of that. While you have these variety of effects, this is a terminal, which means you need extra actions in order to play this off. So any village will work. All in all, it's not a bad card. It's very decent. get it early on, and then eventually when you have no use for it, then trash it. It'll serve you well in all parts of the game up until the late game, and it's generally a good card. So if you can pick if this is available to you and you have the coin, grab one of them just so that you can start working on your engines, because this is what it's gonna do. It's an engine starter, and this will help you get to that point. It's overall an impressive card for what it's worth. Next up, Marvel references aside, we have the Mandarin. Costing 5 the purchase, plus 3 coin. Put a card from your hand onto your deck. When you gain this, put all treasures you have in play onto your deck in any order. Now, let's look at the positive sides of this card. First off, plus 3 coin. That's impressive. Even a King's Court alone on this will net you a platinum or a province, no questions asked. And that brings me to probably one of the main strategies of this card. Basically, simply using 5 or fewer treasures to buy a province and a Mandarin, top decking those treasures because of its secondary effect when you're gaining it, just to repeat the process. And this is where Horn of Plenty can also be useful in that case, basically giving you that province engine you're looking for. However, that's where positive parts of it end. It's an expensive terminal gold. It's more expensive than contraband. And the problem with that is it's going to slow down your deck. First off, it's going to slow down cycling because you're going to have to be forced to top deck a card from your hand onto your deck every single time you use it. And that King's Court strategy means you got to do it 3 times, which is ouchy. It's infrequently worth gaining. You don't really want to constantly top deck treasures because it's going to prevent your engine from taking off and giving you more stop cards than you need. You basically want to use the stop cards and then discard them immediately after, which makes it harder to do. You could offset it a little bit if you had Tiara in the mix, which will help on these engines as well. But because of the fact that you have to top deck all of the treasures and still put a card from your hand onto your deck every single time you do this, you're eventually going to come across having more than one Mandarin in your hand, and that's going to be a hindrance. You cannot rely on this to be the entirety of your engine. You need more. First off, you need actions, and you need a lot of draw power. It is not the strongest, and it's not going to be versatile. In short, it's a weak card. It really is. As much as you can do this, your strategy depends on having specific cards for it. So the Horn of Plenty is kind of important for that, and basically you need the draw power for it. By that reason, it's a mid to late game card. I would not recommend this on the early game. You want to limit yourself to having maybe 1 copy or 2 at most into your deck, especially if you have expensive treasures. Only if you can guarantee yourself getting provinces at the very least every single turn. Next card up for the set is Margrave, costing 5 the purchase, plus 3 cards plus 1 buy. Each other player draws a card, then discard downs to 3 cards in hand. One of the first attack cards for the set, and actually one of the first cards in the set we talked about that actually gives buys. This is a fantastic card for both your money strategies and your overall engines in general. Let's look at the attack first. Obviously a hand size attack, but not as strong as a militia or goons because it offers your opponent a slight amount of cycling and gives them a chance for some better card selection when they need to discard. So it gives them a little bit more option in case they are drawing into some dead cards. They are discarding down 3 from 6, so that can be a little risky. However, the payoff is good. It is so worth it right now, because first off, that's the only downside to Margrave. You basically get 3 cards and plus 1 buy. This makes this a solid upgrade from a warehouse because of that. You will be able to take advantage of the 3 cards without yourself having to discard. With a good amount of village in your hand and in your deck, you can overdraw. And that's going to be fantastic. This is up there with Council Room as terms of a good card with it having a hand size attack. So yeah, you're trading off 1 card for an attack. That's fantastic. So this is going to accelerate your deck. But the card that really shines well with Margrave because of this draw power is Fool's Gold. You draw into multiple Fool's Golds because of this, you're set. You're basically going to be able to purchase anything. And this is why King's Court and Throne Room are viable options, because they give you those buys. You need them. if you're playing Fool's Gold with this, you need that extra buy because you will basically be purchasing anything you damn well want. So, this is an excellent card. The one downside, of course, it's terminal draw, which means you do need the actions to back it up. The card selection offered to your opponent is compounded constantly, so that is the one downside by playing multiple of them. But that's not a bad deal. This is a very strong card, regardless of that. So, early to mid game, even late game, if your deck is thin enough and you can overdraw, couple of these. Or one enough to trigger being able to use it multiple times. Get this into your deck, it's going to be useful, and you need a couple of these. Money strategies overall, and basically a good basis for multiple engine decks. This is a solid card, and I love that they did this. It's perfect. Next on the list, we're going to take a look at Noble Brigand, costing 4 to purchase, +1 coin. Each of the player reveals the top 2 cards of their deck, trashes the revealed silver or gold you choose, discards the rest, and gains a copper if they didn't reveal a treasure. You gain the trash cards. When you buy this, do its attack. So, we're looking at a slight alteration from the Bandit, Thief cards of the base game, with an added twist. So, first off, it's nice that when you're able to buy this immediately, you automatically do its attack. So that's pretty damn impressive, because that could potentially give you a silver or gold that your opponent might have on their top deck, and basically force them to discard it and then add some junk. So we're looking at a trash for benefit to a degree and a junking attack. However, it's underwhelming. First off, while 4 costs is not expensive, it's pretty decent, you're only gaining +1 coin. That's not super great. And the problem here is this. If the supply piles have a multitude of treasure cards that are not silvers or golds, and your opponent is stacking up on those, that could prevent this card from actually gaining its full effect. Not to mention, they might be getting their coin from terminal cards. Plus, if they can go right to platinums, basically just going to discard a hint of them. So, it's not a super strong attack, and the ability to gain the treasure is not going to be overwhelming. I mean, yes, it is a stronger version of Thief when it came right down to this, but even Thief got an upgrade. Bandit does a lot better and more for the money strategies. It will counter Bandit, no problem, but they can work around it. If they didn't have the silver and golds, yeah, they'll probably get coppers, but it's not like it'll be a massive bad thing to happen. The only way this would work out great is if you King's Court of Throne Room the card. But besides that, you really want 4 on a +1? That's the only benefit you get out of that. It basically was too weak. And funny story, because the base game update pack came out after Hinterlands. Technically, Bandit is the stronger of both Noble Brigand and Thief. So, you know where I'm going with this. It is a mild junking attack, gives you coppers, which it could be good for your opponent if they got them. But if they're don't have silvers or golds, they're not going to really worry about it. It's not going to make a big difference, and it's not going to shine for them. So, really only get it in big money strategy decks, which apparently in the online multiplayer games, that seems to be a big deal. So, that is the one place where it can shine for. So, if you're going to go for that early to mid because of its cost, don't get this late game. And limit because of the fact that you're only going to get +1 from each Noble Brigand. If you can afford to play it multiple copies at once, then yeah, that's fine. But these are terminal draws. You're going to want King's Court of Throne Room to help you out with this. You could, the one thing I could say, you could forego a copper for a Noble Brigand and do it that way, but you don't want it to replace your entire deck with the Noble Brigands, because otherwise then how are you going to play them? You need the actions for it. You got to think about benefiting yourself first before the attack goes through. Next up, we're going to look at Nomad Camp. Costing 4 to purchase, +1 buy, +2 coin. This is gained onto your deck instead of your discard pile. Now, this is essentially a woodcutter with that added effect, though. Right off the bat, one negative is that the woodcutter only costs 3 to get a +1 buy +2 coin. You're essentially paying 1 more coin for that secondary effect, and it's not super strong. It gives you the ability to just top deck this, which, yes, early on can be fantastic, but you might not want to continuously have this card piled on top of your deck, especially if Margrave is a better option in terms of your buy. The Terminal Silver is not bad, but you don't want your deck engine slowing down in any way, and this is exactly what this does. You are forced to top deck this card. You can't just say no. You have to put it onto your deck. There are some options where this can be helpful, though. On a 4-3 split, using your turn 1 buy gives you a 40% chance to hit 5 on turn 2. I mean, the probability is that you might not hit it, so it's not worth doing often, but if it gives you that ample opportunity to do so, it can be good. And it will help if we can make sure you have enough coin to hit those important price points. And going for that province is going to be absolutely nothing to scoff at. Most people do not want to have cards top deck unless they know it's going to work with their engine. So they would rather Harbinger cards that they know is going to be better rather than have a woodcutter with a penalty. And that's basically what this is. You're paying 1 more for this penalty on a +1 buy +2 coin. It's not a great option. It's going to compete with other terminal cards, many of which are stronger, and again, the top decking is really bad being a stock card. I mean, there is good deck control engines that can use it for faster building, but even then you might want to skip over it if it's better used for other options on piles. So this is really a situation where if the kingdoms are not strong enough, the Nomad Camp might be a good option for you, but even at that point, you want to limit yourself in the early to mid game, where a +2 is going to get you a little bit more extra coverage in the end. At that point, you don't need many more. If there's I will say this, however. If there are no other options for plus buys, then yeah, you may have to take this if you want to get elite. It's not a late game card. It's definitely, I mean, I say mid, but even then, mid's pushing it a little bit. This is definitely an early game card just to get your advantage going early rather than in the late when it's not going to work out for you. So if your deck's not completely set up by mid game, then yeah, Nomad Camp is not going to be a bad card to go with. Get it based on the piles. Overall, it's an okay card. Next, we're going to take a look at Oasis. Costing 3 to purchase, +1 card, +1 action, +1 coin, but discard a card. I'm not going to go into too much detail with this card. This is basically a peddler variant with the cost of gaining 1 coin for discarding a card. Now, rather than maintaining your hand size, you're basically decreasing it. So you're going -1 in card advantage on a cantrip, which isn't the best. But it is a reasonable alternative on purchasing silvers in the openings for this because you could probably get a little bit more cycling out of it, but you don't want to completely rely on this. Yes, you will be able to discard junk or dead cards, and your estates are definitely going to be the prime target in the early game, especially with that cost there. And basically, other uses would be decks that can benefit from shifting and even non-terminal action-based payload cards. So, like, I didn't want to bring it up, but Nomad Camp would be an option in that particular case. You can chain them, but you will run out of cards. It's like Warehouse. You are going to eventually run out of cards in your hands, so you need the extra draw without relying on the discard. So, the village, your workers' village, as well as smithies, are going to be nice little additions to this with it. So, it's good for getting rid of some of your crap if there's nothing much in trash or benefit. Because of its cost, though, it is an early to mid-game card. You definitely don't want this in the late game, because at that point your engine's built up. But it is good for some cycling overall. I will say, Menagerie, not a bad card to work with because of the fact that you're discarding. That's going to help out immensely. That is a good synergy there. Overall, not a bad card, though. Next up, we're going to look at Oracle. Costing 3 to purchase, each player, including you, reveals the top 2 cards of the deck and discards them or puts them back, your choice. However, they choose the order. Then, you draw 2 cards. Now, the one thing I want to make clear here is that There is no choices in this matter when it comes to the cards. Either both of those cards get discarded or they get top deck. You cannot choose one to discard and then top deck the other. You have to do both. So, this is deck inspection and a mild terminal draw. I mean, it's basically comparable to a moat and needs village support for the actions because otherwise you're going to run out of time, run out of options. So, it is very slow to get started here. It is a reasonable choice in the opening if you don't have the ability to draw, or you could potentially draw into dead cards. So having a little bit of cycling early on is not as bad, but you're still going to end up needing actions in order to be able to take advantage of it. It's not super strong because it's slow to get going. You could top deck 2 cards, but if one of them is trash and one of them isn't, then you might want to keep the cards. And your opponent might want those cards to get discarded. It really depends. You're making the choice. It's not a very powerful attack, and again, if we look back towards Saboteur from Intrigue, the problem here is it could also benefit your opponent if you decide to discard this card. So they could get something better than what's there available for them, and it might actually give them a little bit more deck synergy. So overall, there's not many use cases. It's going to be very hard to really take advantage of this card, and everything is low impact. You need village support coupled with much better draw power, and there's better options where you could do a lot of sifting. This is more useful if you are relying heavily less on dead cards or terminal draw, more to the point that you have the village support as well as the coin generating from your action cards, as well as minimal victory card space, which at this point, if that's the case, by mid to late game, you're not going to want this in your deck because you're going to have much better options on there. I would say early to mid game, but overall not a bad card. And now we come to Scheme. Costing 3 to purchase, +1 card, +1 action. This turn you may put one of your action cards onto your deck when you discard it from play. Now this is a cantrip that takes something from Harbinger and twists it around a little bit. What this gives you is basically recycling. And that is going to be extremely powerful, especially for that cost. It basically continues to improve reliability for your deck and your engines overall. And there's a couple of ways you can go about this. Basically, with cards you're using such as Scrying Pool, you basically want to be able to prevent yourself from dudding or dead drawing, essentially, any non-terminal draw. So cards that are going to give you just priority action and some scry is going to be beneficial. And Scrying Pool, or even a village, will take the cake there. Another way is to make sure that you constantly have a source of reaction cards or attack negation in your starting hand. So, basically your moats or your lighthouses, anything that's going to prevent an attack coming through to you, or even getting ready to counterattack based on the card that's available to you. And it can also be used, when you have junky decks, basically giving you a chance to get through some, potential discards without having to necessarily use multiple turns. So good for slow games. Or even better, best card to top deck would be Scheme itself, where it could just continuously help you for each and every card you have. So you're going to want quite a few of these in your deck. A couple of good synergies though, Outposts especially, making it a little less dud prone. So it gives you a little bit more access to another potentially useful card. And basically being able to top deck Menagerie on Outpost with Scheme is going to be a very powerful output and giving you a full turn rather than a crappier one. Getting King's Court or even the Throne Room and potentially getting 2 with some good actions means, hi, let's make this worthwhile. And yes, King's Courting this means you get to use it 3 times. It's fantastic. Overall, this has some versatility in a lot of decks that you use, so this requires careful planning of your engines when you get this. But because it is a cheap card, you could get this early on, not in your immediate play because you need some action cards. So the moment you start getting some decent action cards, then pick this up, especially if you have plus buy. So definitely more of an early mid-game card. Overall, it's fantastic, and it's good for potentially a multitude of options. Worth picking up a couple of them for that cost. Next up, we have a new victory card, Silk Road. Costing 4 to purchase, worth 1 victory point for every 4 victory cards you have, rounded down. 8 in games with 2 players, 12 for games with 3 or more. And just as a case example, if you have 11 victory cards, Silk Road is going to be worth 2. While it is a source of alternate victory points, it's weaker than even Fairgrounds or even Gardens in that regard. It's not super great. This is more viable when you are focusing on provinces as well as colonies, but then you also need to pick up duchies as well. So you're forcing yourself to purchase some unnecessary cards. Now, be that as it may, it is 4 costs, so you could potentially aim for a pile-out, workshop, and ironworks and get these because they do count as a victory card themselves, so that will be very useful. And they could synergize with the duchies and the dukes if need be, but you're going to be greening your deck so much that it's hard. It's really dependent on the number of victory cards you gain during the game, and if you're relying on cards that generate victory points like a Monument or even Bishop, it's going to have the victory points of an estate, but more expensive. So there's going to be a couple of potential good options for actually using this card, and one of them would be if you want to pile out early. So yes, using the workshop variants, including Ironworks, is going to be great, especially picking these up, especially getting as many as you can along with the estates as need be. Or if you have the option of the dual victory cards such as Nobles and Mills, that will help out immensely either. But it's overall a borderline card. It's not super strong. You're basically forcing yourself to green your deck, and that's not the greatest. And at this point, you need those victory cards before you pick this up. So this is a mid-game card. Even if that cost seems worth it to you, you need the strength to be able to gain its effect very powerfully. So you need at least 12 to make that cost worth it. And by at that point, you're probably trying to focus on provinces and colonies. So if those aren't good options and money generation seems to be hitting a very, very big low, then yes, I could say Silk Road was worth it, but only in that regard. Next up, we have a unique trash for benefited card in terms of what it actually does for its effect rather than what you receive as its output. Spice Merchant, costing 4 to purchase. You may trash a treasure from your hand and choose one. +2 cards and +1 action, or +1 buy and +2 coin. Now, because of the way it's saying trash a treasure, it's either going to be your very weak treasures like loan and contraband, or even your coppers. This is basically going to just synergize with Moneylender to get you a little bit more firepower. Now, 9 times out of 10, a lot of people are going to go for the +1 action, +2 cards, because it's going to help them maintain some overall deck control, hand size, and even some cycling. And if you're getting your more powerful terminal cards into your deck, then you basically need to shrink down getting to those cards, as well as being able to access them on the same turn you play, that giving you that extra action. So that's vitally important. Now, the +2 coin, +1 buy, that's not bad. I mean, we could take Woodcutter having a cost like that, and that would actually be a little bit better than Nomad Camp in a way. It's very good, and it works out for what it does, just because of that overall. This is also excellent with a money gainer such as Jack of all trades. I would say that specifically, and not so much Courtier or Bandit, because you basically have to trash the gold, and I wouldn't do that. And that actually brings me to another interesting card that would work well in this regard. If I recall correctly, that would be the one known as Trading Post, because then you could also shrink down those coffers for the silver, use the silver toward that. So, you know, another unique situation for that. But that would require 2 to 1. Because this is a copper trasher, this is definitely an early game card because you are basically boosting up to your more expensive treasures, basically the same way Moneylender works. And because it's focusing on coppers, it's in the same tier as the counting house as well as Coppersmith. Copper generators such as Montebank, and even using Charlatan would not be a bad option, because at least you would have ways to get rid of the curses and the coppers that way. So overall, it's a very strong card for that cost, and recommend it in the early to mid game. Late game, you could still do that at the point where you could get the plus buy and the plus 2 coin, and basically set yourself up to purchase a lot of green. So very good card all around. And now we move into the stables. Costing 5 to purchase, you may discard a treasure for plus 3 cards and plus 1 action. Now this takes Spice Merchant into a different direction. Rather than trashing for the effect, you only have to discard the treasure, which is very good. Now, it can be unreliable at times, because if you don't have the treasure in your hand and you're relying heavily on terminal cards giving you coin, then this instantly becomes a dead card in your hand. But this does give you a +1 in card advantage, so that is overall fantastic, and at least will keep you drawing into your cards eventually. In a situation like this, you need as many treasures as you do stables, just because it only works if you have the treasure in hand to discard. Stables is a card that requires a lot of shuffling management, and you're really going to have to rely on a lot of treasures other than your basics in order for it to actually do well. You basically will have these in big money decks where you have a variety of treasure cards besides your copper, silvers, and golds. You don't want to use your golds. You might consider the silvers if Jack of all trades is available. You could potentially use the gold in a circumstance where Courtier or Bandit is generating the gold for you, but other than that, if there are astrolabes, if there are other treasure cards like Bank, Philosopher's Stone, Loan, Contraband, War Chest, any of those, you could use those as a much better sacrifice rather than your more expensive. With this cost though, 5 costs mid-game, because you want to make sure you have plenty of treasures to use this, and you basically want to set up for big money. You could do early game, but you're basically just drawing and nothing beneficial after that, so you might get some more expensive treasure, but I wouldn't do it unless you had a few decent treasure cards besides your initial coppers in your deck before you started using stables overall. So mid-game to start off with. Still, very good card for your engine. Coming to the end with 2 cards to go. First one we're going to look at is Trader. Costing 4 to purchase. Trash a card from your hand. Gain a silver per 1 it costs for the action part. For its reaction, when you gain a card, you may reveal this from your hand to exchange the card from a silver. Now, it actually received an update in 2020, making the reaction a when gain ability rather than a when would gain ability, which made it slightly simpler and less weird, but it's still a very unusual card simply because of the fact that it's a very weak trash for benefit effect. But let's look at it this way. For its reaction, it is a good counter against junking as well as Curse Generator, and in a very special case here would be Montebank. So you could essentially reveal the trader twice to exchange both the curse and the copper for a silver. A good way to work around that, and a more interesting way to actually get these rather than Jack of all trades where you would simply get it. So you could potentially build up a bunch of silvers and use them for Spice Merchant or even Money Lender, just so that you can get them out of your deck so you're not over flooded with a whole bunch of silvers. It is, I mean, it's not a strong defense, but it's still decent enough that it can work. And it's good for money strategy, so trash for benefit is viable in this, because then you can play into some golds a lot better. However, it's unsuitable as a primary source of thinning. You're only trashing 1 card at a time. It basically would only thin if you trash a copper, or at the very least gain a silver. And unless you are really deprived of treasure cards, you really don't need to trash anything more expensive than 3 to get a silver. It's really unsuitable, and you're not going to use it for its primary effect. You're basically going to use it for its reaction. And that's about it. You're basically creating big money out of big money. You basically would have to use this and a second trash for benefit card on the silver in order to really gain something powerful, where other cards you could just use that card itself to trash over it. If I was to pick this card up, it would definitely be the early game card, because at the very least you could save spending money on the silvers for something that could potentially cost 3 or 4, rather than having to buy the silver itself. At the very least, if you know there's going to be a lot of attack cards that are going to be generating curses, or something like Montebank that's going to also generate coppers for you, then yes, Trader is going to be useful to you, and you're going to want to take advantage of that. I don't see many uses outside of the mid to late game. It's really hard to really take advantage of that. It's a weird card. And the final card we're going to look at for Hinterlands version 1.0 is a new type, a victory reaction card, Tunnel. Costing 3 to purchase. For the victory, generating 2 victory points. For the reaction, when you discard this other than during cleanup, you may reveal it to gain a gold. Now, this is situational, but this can be a very powerful gold gainer if played right alongside Courtier and Bandit. Let's look at it this way. When you have enough deck control, and you can basically collide into discarding cards and being able to effectively draw into your deck numerous times, cards like Warehouse, Oasis, and even Crystal Ball will be viable in getting you these golds easily enough. Because first off, you don't lose these victory points. You don't need to trash, by the way, 8 for 2-player games, 12 for 3 or more. So that at least saves you a little time and effort. However, it does require having some green in your deck and being able to constantly get these tunnels into your hand on a constant basis to being able to purchase these. However, because of that cost, getting an Iron Workshop combo is usually very useful in order to do that. This is reliable in big money gain decks, without a doubt. You're basically generating the golds yourselves without having any opportunity to purchase them. You can focus on your action cards to get you the necessary engine you need and use these tunnels for your discard. But that's very situational. Having the Warehouse, having the Oasis, having the Crystal Ball available to you, they need to be there. Otherwise, this is just simply a 2 victory point card for 3, which is still with the ratio being better than Duchess or Estates, it's actually worth picking these up for that cost, especially if you have plenty full of buys in addition to the provinces, especially if the Duchies are starting to run dry a little bit. It's basically good in the mid or late game when you have the engine needed and you want to start gaining some golds. If you can get some golds early on using Tunnel's effect, then by all means pick this up as much as possible. If you can discard more than one tunnel at a time, Throne's Room, or even King's Core, then you won't need to buy gold. You will basically have enough to basically purchase whatever you need. Definitely a mid-game card. You could potentially get it early, but it will just be a dead card in your hand. You could also basically replace Remake into your estates into the tunnels for a faster output. That way they can sit there as extra victory points, giving you a slight advantage in lead while waiting for the basic discards. But if you're not able to get those discards, simply put, this is just a basic victory card. This is not a bad type for what it is, and it's very interesting. I like it. And with that, we are at the end of Hinterlands version 1.0. The next video we'll do is we'll talk about the cards that were added in the version 2.0 with the update pack that just came out just a short while ago. Again, like Prosperity, we have 9 cards coming in and 9 cards coming out. This is the last update pack we have received up to date. I have not seen any news about any new ones coming out, so I'm not sure if we are to expect them anytime too soon, especially with a new expansion coming out. Thank you, Mr. Buccarino. I appreciate it. And with that, thank you very much for watching, guys. If you liked the video, be sure to give it a like and a comment. And if you want to see more of this, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Every like, every comment, every subscriber helps out the channel a whole bunch, and I will greatly appreciate it. You can also follow me on Twitter for my updates, as well as Twitch for my streams on Final Fantasy XIV, Mass Effect, and maybe some more Dominion as well. And don't forget to catch my daily YouTube shorts on my 2 fluffy felines, Figaro and Sabrina, on the YouTube channel. I will be continuously doing that on a daily basis. Thank you very much again, guys, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your week. Take care.